Well, joining us now to discuss this is John Kettley, weather forecaster. John, fantastic having you on the programme. I mean, it's pretty chilly, isn't it? Is this one of the coldest winters we've had in recent years?
Well, it's only been about a week, hasn't it, of chilly weather, rather raw winds now covering the country, but temperatures have actually risen during the morning, so things aren't as bad now as they were, say, 24 hours ago. You know, we had that terrible snowfall over Cumbria on Saturday, was it? And then yesterday, the North Midlands up into northern England caught quite a bucket of snow. I had about 7 centimetres here, for example, where I am in Lincolnshire. It's all melted away now. Temperatures are back up to about 4 degrees. So really what's happening is that the milder air is pushing further north, but it's only temporary because it does look as though the colder weather will start to move back again for about 24, 36 hours. It's going to turn some of that rain back into snow, say, across the mountains of North Wales and the Pennines and across eastern Scotland as well for a time tonight into first thing tomorrow. But it's really more about the rain as we go forward during this week, because with rising temperatures for most of the time, after an early frost on Wednesday, it does look as though things are going to get back to what you might say was fairly typical British winter weather.
Which we were kind of having down here in London, John. You know, at the weekend it was quite cold on Saturday, but yesterday was just basically miserable and drizzly. Meanwhile, up in Cumbria in particular, they were talking about snow the like of which they've never seen in their lives. Where did that come from?
Yeah, were these people about 18? I'm not sure, but I thought it always snowed heavily in Cumbria during the winter. It's just that I think on this occasion, although obviously the fells were absolutely caked in snow, I think it was because it was more across the southern lakes and into Kendal, around Ambleside through to Kendal, where it was at its worst, and Coniston as well, an area I know quite well. And I think it's because we had the perpetual showers coming in off the Irish Sea and running northeastwards up across southern parts of the Lake District, and they were stuck in that one particular zone rather than going further north up towards Carlisle and Keswick. So it was really more localised in the south of the lakes and Ambleside than it was normally, where you get it across the whole of the Cumbrian area when you get a real winter blast.
A number of motorists found they were caught, actually, saying that perhaps the weather reports hadn't been able to indicate the snow was going to be so heavy, and a number of them stranded, essentially, when snowfall turned out to be far heavier than expected. How good are weather forecasters today in the various weather apps people have on their phone? I've got 7, I'm a lunatic. How good are they in this day and age of being able to predict the forecast going forward?
Well, let's put it this way, you can't run your life on apps. Honestly, you can't. And the weather apps are notoriously dodgy because they don't all agree with each other, which is a bit of an issue, isn't it, really? You've got 7. Well, I think you want to throw 5 of them away for a start. It just gets complicated. You still need the dear old meteorologist, surely. I'm here. I'm always here. I'm available at any time. I'm very cheap. So you still need that man-machine mix, if you want. An app is only going to be taking data from a computer system, which is downloaded into the telephone, or the iPhone, I should say. But you still need a bit of nous, a bit of old-fashioned forecasting knowledge, which is always useful in these situations. But I have to admit, it was very, very heavy snow, albeit locally, across southern Cumbria on Saturday. And I think it was a difficult one to get right. The forecast wasn't accurate by any means, but the thought of snow was always on the cards. But I think you'd probably be looking at 3 or 4 centimetres rather than 30 or whatever it was in some places.
You mentioned earlier, John, that we can look forward to a sort of return of the freezing weather. Going forward, you know what I'm going to ask you now? Is there going to be a white Christmas? And if so, for how many of us?
At the moment, this very, very short temporary cold return into Wednesday morning is just that. It is going to be milder for the rest of the week and through next weekend and into the start of the following week. So we're getting on now, aren't we, up towards it'll be about the 14th, 15th of December. And my main concern would be with bands of rain sweeping in and heavy winds as well. There's going to be a fair bit of waterlogging and flooding going on, especially with all the snow melt that's got to come down in the next 12 hours back into the river catchments of the Pennines and Cumbria, for example, and eastern Scotland. So I think at the moment, all we have to really concern ourselves about is the fact that we could get swollen rivers and a risk of flooding in some parts of the country. There are certainly signs that there will be some colder weather returning from Eastern Europe as we go through to, say, the 16th, 17th, something like that, of December. And that is something of a concern because it may well just get locked into our part of the world, and it may well produce some colder weather for Christmas that we don't normally see. If you just cast your memories back to 2010, that was a pretty severe December, and we did have a white Christmas on that occasion. But really, you're going right the way back to 1981 for a fantastic bout of snow across most parts of the UK, although ironically, there was snow on the ground in most parts of the UK, but it wasn't classed as a white Christmas because it didn't snow on Christmas Day. It's so bizarre.
John, I'll tell you what you just gave there. A really good politician's answer. Didn't actually tell us whether there'd be a white Christmas or not. Indicated, I think, I'm going to take from what you did said with this cold blast coming from Eastern Europe that, well, there could be.
There certainly could be. And if you want to come back to me, I'm always available. As I say, I'm very cheap.
You're going to be my human app.
Absolutely. You all know this because people must ask you this all the time, as I just did. You know, is it going to be a white Christmas? You know, when people put bets on it being a white Christmas, what's the criterion for that bet to be successful? Is it like one flake, or does it have to settle, or what?
No, it doesn't have to settle. It's bizarre. In any one particular place where you're putting the bet on, and it's often at different airports around the country or weather centres, mainly airports these days. But if there's a flake of snow coming down or a bit of sleet coming down out of the sky during that 24-hour period from midnight to midnight, and an observer spots that flake of snow, that is a white Christmas. I mean, you've got to draw the line somewhere. It seems absolutely ridiculous because there could be snow on the ground from the day before. And if it doesn't actually snow on Christmas Day, that is not a white Christmas. But that's what the bookies have to go with. So it's a tricky one. It's a difficult one. But this is probably one reason why it very rarely is a white Christmas, because it's probably snowed either side. And on Christmas Day itself, it's just green and miserable and not very pleasant.
Oh, do you know, I turned 40 the day after Christmas. I know, hard to believe.
You are kidding.
Thank you.
That can't be true.
And I don't think I can remember having one in my lifetime at all.
A white Christmas? I think I've had a few. One. I think I've had a few.
Well, yeah, 40. Well, you're only 40. Well, I'll look forward to being 40.
Yeah, me too. Me too, yeah. It's a long way off.
But 2010... and we're only going back 13 years. 2010 was a very severe December. It came out of the blue, really. It was extremely severe. Even with me, it was minus 16 degrees overnight, and there was a lot of snow around at the end of November into the first week or so of December. That was a pretty severe spell, which we don't normally get pre-Christmas. You normally find that the atmosphere is cooling down as we go through to the New Year and then through to February. So it's more likely, generally, in most years, to get colder as the winter goes on. And then you go more likely to get the snow settling on the ground. But obviously Christmas Day comes too soon. It's my mantra, always has been. Much more likely to get snow lying on the ground at Easter than you are at Christmas Day.
Well, John, we're going to come back to you before Christmas for another check on whether or not it will be a white Christmas, because I'm going to put like a $5 on it, snowing on the big day. Great to talk to you, John.
Well, obviously, different prices wherever you are. It could be Aberdeen, more chance of Aberdeen.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, go to the Highlands, then I can win, right? Yeah, I suppose you get really bad odds up in Scotland, don't you, on a white Christmas?
Well, they wouldn't be as good. They'd probably be about 2 or 3 to 1. Whereas if you're looking at Bristol or Cardiff or something, you're going to be, what, 7 to 1, something like that?
See, that's the thing. Yeah. I'm a West Country girl, and it just doesn't really get snowy there, does it?
Well, because you have tropical conditions in Gloucester, do you?
It is.
Yeah,
it's the palm tree-lined avenues of Gloucester.
Alex, you wouldn't get on an app. The fact that it's going to snow on Christmas Day, probably.
I'll tell you what, you don't get on an app anyway in Gloucester because there's no phone signal, frankly speaking.
Well,
it's not great here.
John, thank you ever so much for joining us.